How to properly care for Spathiphyllum. You will learn about it today in detail from this video. If you follow all the recommendations, you will never encounter problems with the growth of Spathiphyllum, and even more so, you will not encounter such a very common problem as yellowing leaves. Watch this video to the end and all questions will fall away by themselves. Let's start, as usual, with the right lighting. Spathiphyllum is suitable for keeping on any window, even on the one that is not very well lit. On southern windows, it must necessarily shade it, especially from direct sunlight. Ideally, of course, you should provide him with soft, diffused light, but even in the penumbra, it will feel fine. It is very easy to see whether Spathiphyllum has enough light or not. If there is a lack of light, its leaves take on a more elongated shape and become dark green. It stops blooming or blooms very rarely. And if you get too much light, your Spathiphyllum's leaves start to turn pale. Take a look at your Spathiphyllum and you will immediately realize whether or not it likes the light level where you have it. Now let's move on to the temperature of maintenance. Immediately, I will say that Spathiphyllum likes heat, but does not tolerate heat. In summer, he will be comfortable at a temperature of 22–23 degrees. In warm regions where the temperature is high, make sure that in the room where it is located, the temperature does not rise above 32 degrees. It is critical for Spathiphyllum. In winter, the temperature should not fall below 16 degrees, otherwise growth will be stunted. Lower temperatures can lead to rotting of the roots of Spathiphyllum. You should also protect it from drafts, especially cold drafts, as it cannot tolerate them. Now about watering. Since the dormant period of Spathiphyllum is not pronounced, it should be watered all year round. In spring and summer, water it abundantly after drying out the soil a little more than halfway. By the way, many people start to worry when they see that Spathiphyllum has dropped its leaves or they hang like rags. Do not worry about this, it just wants to show that it is time to water. After watering, everything will return to normal. When you will gain opiate in watering, you will not have such moments. Also, Spathiphyllum will be grateful to a warm shower twice a month, but this can be done only in the summer. In winter, water it less, especially if it does not flower and the room where it is kept is cool. When the top layer of soil dries up, wait a few more days and only then water. If it blooms, it means that it is wintering in the warmth and it should be watered as usual. Water for watering should be slightly warm, 30–35 degrees, and well tempered for at least a day. Never water Spathiphyllum with cold water. From this, it experiences shock and begins to get sick, even may die. Try not to flood it. The soil should not be constantly damp. It tolerates drying out much better than overwatering. If you overwater it, you will encounter problems with yellowing of leaf petioles and drying of buds and flowers. And you don't want that? No, so be careful about watering. Spathiphyllum likes high humidity, but this applies only to the upper part of the plant, above the soil, not the soil itself in the pot. Next, let's move on to air humidity. As I have already mentioned, Spathiphyllum likes high humidity, so it is desirable, even very desirable, to have a humidifier at home. And even if you have one, you should not refuse to spray. The more often, the better. Spathiphyllum will be very grateful to you for this. However, do it only when the room is warm and the water should not fall on the flowers themselves if he is blooming. Be careful. In winter, if the plant stands on a cool windowsill, in no case do not spray it. A humidifier will be quite enough. Because of the work of heating, the air is very dry and the tips of the leaves begin to dry out. But unfortunately, in the conditions of our apartments, this is inevitable. Spraying, even frequent spraying, will still not save from this and can, on the contrary, harm. Next, I will tell you how and with what to fertilize it properly. In spring, it is time for the first fertilization, and this should be done until deep autumn. Once every 2 weeks will be enough. Choose a fertilizer with a predominance of potassium and phosphorus, because if you feed it with nitrogen fertilizers, you may not see blooms at all, or it will be rare and meager, and the foliage will grow continuously and in large quantities. If you have Spathiphyllum bloomed in winter, then continue to feed it with the same fertilizers, but reduce the frequency to once every 3 to 4 weeks and reduce the dose by half. If you notice dark spots appearing on the leaves, it means that you are overfeeding it with fertilizer. If so, fertilize less often and reduce the dose. And don't forget to water it a few hours before fertilizing so that you don't burn the roots. This, by the way, applies to any plants, not just Spathiphyllum. Watered with water, and after 2 to 3 hours, put fertilizer. This is the right way to do it. The next important point in Spathiphyllum care is the right soil. The soil should be loose so that it absorbs moisture quickly and dries quickly so that it does not retain water for a long time. In stores sell ready-made soil for orchid plants. It says so on the package. It will work well for our Spathiphyllum. In extreme cases, you can buy an universal soil. Buy it and add about 30% perlite for loosening. Also add pieces of pine bark, about 10% of the volume of the soil. The size of the pieces of bark is preferably 1.5 to 2 centimeters. In such a soil, Spathiphyllum will feel great and it will be easier for you to care for it. Prevent root rotting is better in advance than to then solve this problem. And now about repotting. Young Spathiphyllums are transplanted every year and adults once every 2 years. When you transplant it, do not water it afterwards until the soil has dried out slightly. This will take a few days or so. This way, you will keep the Spathiphyllum from rotting because the disturbed roots need time to heal. Even if it seems to you that you did everything carefully, do not take risks. The roots will still be a little traumatized. By the way, transplanting Spathiphyllum does not mean that it needs to be transplanted into another pot. If the roots have not grown much, you can leave it in the old one, just change the soil to a fresh one. Spathiphyllum does not like large and spacious pots, and you will not like it because in large pots, flowering is inhibited until the roots are not pushed to the edges of the pot. After transplanting, it should be put in a warm place with a temperature of at least 23 degrees. Freshly transplanted plants should be watered very moderately and sprayed more often so they will recover faster. And do not bury the Spathiphyllum too deeply into the soil. The root part of the leaves should be on the surface, not under the soil. And of course, do not forget about drainage holes in the bottom of the pot. Well and drainage in the pot should be poured a height of 2 or 3 centimeters. Cladite is suitable for drainage. Next, I will talk about the blooming of Spathiphyllum. If you follow the right care, your Spathiphyllum will bloom for a long time. Its main advantage is that flowering can last from 1.5 to 2 months, which is very many people like. Well, it's understandable, everyone loves flowers. The size of the inflorescence, namely the middle of the flower and the cover and the flower of Spathiphyllum, is divided just so, depend on the species and variety, but the color is always almost the same, snow white. Therefore, in the people it is called a white sail, although the name female happiness is more common. Only sometimes the color of the flowers is light green. This again depends on the variety. Spathiphyllum blooms depending on the quality of care once a year in the spring. And if the care is very good, you can see a second flowering in the fall or winter. After Spathiphyllum has bloomed, the flowering arrow should be removed by cutting it off at the base. And I will answer the popular question, why did the flower begin to turn green? There are no secrets here. Spathiphyllum simply has such a peculiarity. When blooming, the cover turns green. And now about propagation. Spathiphyllum can be propagated in 2 ways, cuttings and division of rhizomes. Cuttings are perfectly rooted in moist soil with the addition of perlite in the proportion of 50% to 50%. It is desirable to create greenhouse conditions, putting a transparent bag on top. If condensation forms under the bag, the greenhouse should be periodically ventilated. Rooting can also be done in water, adding a piece of charcoal so that the water does not spoil. When the first roots appear, they can be transplanted into the ground. The temperature for rooting should not be lower than 23-25 degrees. In spring, Spathiphyllum can be multiplied by dividing the bush. The procedure is as follows. Cut off with a sterile knife at least 2 or 3 leaves with part of the roots from the main bush on the side. If you take less than 2 or 3 leaves, it may not take root. Sprinkle charcoal or activated charcoal powder on all the roots where the cut was made. If charcoal is not available, it can be replaced with cinnamon. Then dry for about 30-40 minutes and you can plant. After this procedure, do not water for 2-3 days. Be sure to create a greenhouse for both the mother plant and the separated plant, so they will tolerate the division better, because Spathiphyllum is hard to tolerate this procedure and after it does not grow for a long time. But you should not worry about this, it is normal. And one more important nuance concerning the polishing of leaves. I am often asked about it. What can you polish the leaves to make them shiny? I don't recommend doing it with anything but a wet rag. Store polishes are based on liquid wax, which clogs the pores of the leaves, and Spathiphyllum is very sensitive to this. The leaves need to breathe freely. Do you polish the leaves of Spathiphyllum or other plants? If yes, then with what? Write in the comments. I think we will all be interested to know. Subscribe, give me a like, and stay tuned for more interesting videos. Your support means a lot to me.